Grazie, ma io in realtà di fatto passo subito la parola al Presidente di Aspen Giulio Tremonti che ci saluterà per poi introdurre la serata.
Grazie. No, ci sono due tradizioni insieme qua, quella delle elezioni presidenziali in America e quella del commento sulle elezioni presidenziali a Roma in Aspen. La prima è una tradizione molto lunga, la seconda è una tradizione più breve e tuttavia dentro questa seconda tradizione c'è interna un'altra tradizione che è quella di commentarle con l'ambasciatore Thorne.
Ecco qua. Okay. I'm really very pleased to be here tonight, and I'm grateful to President Tremonti and Aspen Italia for inviting me. You know, after a long election cycle, the entire world followed with close interest. America has decided. Political scientists and pundits will spend months and even years to analyze what happened and why. Still, I think a few observations are apparent and impact my country's political leaders as they move to confront our economic challenges and financial challenges. First, despite much talk about the election race being too close to call, in the end, President Obama's victory was decisive. The president won 332 electoral votes, easily exceeding the 270 needed in the Electoral College. He won the national popular vote by almost 3 million. Only 2 states that the president won in his historic 2008 victory, Indiana and North Carolina, did not return to his win column. And North Carolina was indeed a lot closer than people thought it was going to be. The president's Democratic Party picked up seats in the House of Representatives and strengthened control of the Senate. And although the Republicans retained control in the House, Democratic House candidates across the United States received more total votes than did the Republican House candidates. Second thought is that the Obama campaign made an early decision to invest in an unprecedented organizational and data-oriented campaign. And the results speak for themselves. The Obama campaign had 800 field offices, and the Romney campaign had only 250. To quote one Republican organizer in Florida, they brought people to the polls we didn't even know existed. Finally, the role of social media and technology, which had something to do with that organization campaign. Something I've spoken about here at the Aspen Institute in the past, also deserves highlighting. Both in fundraising and voter outreach, social media has proven itself to be effective. For political parties in other countries, including Italy, there are interesting models here for using the new technologies and the new media to advance your interests. Also, President Obama won the election by putting together a coalition of women, young people, blue-collar workers, Latinos, African Americans, and other minorities. You know, America is changing, and I just want to give one example that I think is very illustrative of what happened in this election. In 1988, Governor Michael Dukakis ran against President Bush, who actually wasn't President Bush, but ran against George Bush Sr. And he lost the vote of white men by 20%. And he lost the election decisively. In 2012, President Obama lost the vote of white men by 19%, and he won a decisive victory. I think that says a lot about what's changed in America. And I would say that while economic issues were important, we may discover that they were less decisive than originally thought in this election. Still, of course, I believe that it's safe to say that the American people clearly preferred the approach advocated by President Obama for addressing our economic difficulties. that our top priority needs to be jobs and growth, that reducing our deficit must be done in a balanced and responsible way. As the President said last Friday, we cannot just cut our way to prosperity. We need to combine reduced spending and increased revenues from the wealthiest Americans. Okay, so now what? We still risk gridlock and pointless acrimony. Democrats control the executive branch and the Senate. Republicans control the House. The Supreme Court leans conservative. We need to come together as Americans as never before, not as representatives of blue states and red states, to overcome our serious economic challenges. These include ensuring more robust economic growth, getting our national debt under control, creating jobs while improving our educational system, and rebuilding our infrastructure. We cannot achieve these goals without working together. It's my hope that the Republican Party, which spent a great deal of energy, time, and money on the single goal of removing President Obama from office, will now help the nation find common ground. It's also my hope that the Democratic Party will accept serious bipartisan efforts to solve our problems. Early signs, I think, have been promising. In the days since the election, many Republicans are urging a different approach to policy matters and showing a greater willingness to compromise. House Speaker John Boehner, for example, has signaled his willingness to consider new approaches. President Obama, for his part, is meeting this week with civic, labor, business, and congressional leaders in a first step to tackling our economic challenges. It's a promising start as we face the imminent dilemma of the so-called fiscal cliff that I understand your panelists will be addressing in detail. I will not go into details about the fiscal cliff, except to note that the U.S. Congressional Budget Office's report last week forecasted that our economy would fall into recession and lose millions of jobs if we fall off this cliff. This, in turn, would have significant implications for the global economy, as the IMF has warned. Much of the discussion surrounding the fiscal cliff has and will center on how to deal with the U.S. deficit. The absolute number of our deficit, $16 trillion, is staggering and a cause for long-term concern. Still, we must be careful on how we address this issue. Our recovery from the Great Recession is gaining steam, but is still fragile and must be nurtured. It's also important to remember that the size of our economy is also staggering, and that our debt to GDP ratio is about 105%, a troubling level to be sure, but something that can be reduced over time with prudent policies and economic growth. Just as the United States did not create a huge deficit overnight, reducing our debt levels is going to take time. As the size of our economy grows, the denominator in that debt to GDP ratio will also grow. Combine this with record tax borrowing costs, higher revenues from tax reform, selected rate increases on more wealthy Americans, and the growing tax receipts that occur under any robust growing economy, and our long-term deficit should be a manageable problem. That is, as long as pragmatism and compromise are pursued in Washington. I'm optimistic that Americans will move forward together to address our challenges. As President Obama said last Friday, the American people understand that we're going to have differences and disagreements in the months to come. But on Election Day, they said loud and clear that they won't tolerate dysfunction. I'm also optimistic about the U.S. economy. Our economic growth is increasing. The original estimate of 2% growth in the third quarter appears likely to be revised upward. Foreign direct investment is growing. The trend towards offshoring has slowed, and there is evidence that it is reversing, with companies returning to American soil. Unemployment is still too high, but it is falling from 8.5% in January to 7.9% today. Part of our economic regeneration is because we decided against economic policies dominated by austerity measures and instead favored a more balanced approach. Also, and I think this is important to note, and it's sort of recent news. The enormous increase in oil and particularly shale gas production is leading a U.S. industrial renaissance that is demolishing assumptions about American economic decline. In fact, on Monday, the International Energy Agency said the United States would become the world's largest supplier of natural gas in 2015 and the largest producer of oil in 2017. Can you imagine saying that 5 years ago? Can you imagine the fundamental shifts this could bring to global markets, not to mention American foreign policy? Let me close with a comment regarding Italy, which will soon have its own national elections. Today, I see in Italy, under the strong leadership of President Mario Monti, with the cooperation of the leading political parties, that is working hard to reinvigorate its economy and deepen European integration. As always, the United States stands ready to lend its supports to your efforts. We Americans hope that the Italy that emerges after your elections, whatever the composition of that government, is one that is committed to continuing on the path of critical reforms necessary to ensure a brighter and more prosperous future for all Italians. Thank you very much, and for your very cordial welcome and kind attention.